shape and depth to some of the most complicated topics of our time, making them easily accessible for those who seek to understand. We've given voice and space to the stories that often go ignored. Please take a moment to consider being a patron, make a donation, or join Rockfin. Thank you. Well, hello.
Hi, guys.
Hi, good morning, and welcome to another edition of Pullquote.
Yes, another edition of Pullquote. We're really excited to be bringing you Dr. Andrew Kaufman. So without further ado,
let's get rolling. And, first what I do is I read.
You got to read. Got to introduce him.
We have forgotten our own format.
Right. We're so excited.
Andrew Kaufman MD is a public speaker, researcher, natural healing, business education consultant, inventor, and COVID-19 whistleblower. I wanted to make sure I read inventor correctly. Dr. Andy has a BS from MIT in molecular biology and completed his psychiatric training at Duke University Medical Center after graduating from the Medical University of South Carolina. He spent many years in the medical field and practiced as a forensic psychiatrist and expert witness. When he learned that many of the modern medical practices were harming people, not helping them, he gave up his lucrative medical career and began researching and understanding the relationship between body, mind, and spirit, and how to use nature to heal your own body. Dr. Andy's new practice is spreading truth around the world. We live in today and fighting for freedom. We live in today and fighting for freedom. Okay, I get it. All right. He teaches, and I read this already, but whatever. He teaches people the vital knowledge that they need to implement true care for themselves and their families at the highest level of consciousness. He now teaches people to become their own health authority. And welcome, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Hello.
Well, thank you so much for having me this morning.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for coming and being on the show. We're so thrilled to have you.
We got a lot of Twitter activity as a result of announcing that you'd be on today. So we're happy to have you aboard.
Yeah, you've really
fantastic.
Yeah, what you have done for everyone is American Psychiatry.
Okay.
Sorry, we're pulling up your website of yours from a long time ago. What you've done for people has been incredibly helpful, and you've been such a great benefit for those of us who have found ourselves really dubious of the allopathic industry, to say the least. I've been dubious of it practically my whole life.
Well, you've had interactions with the allopathic medicine practice forever, since she basically grew up at Stanford Hospital, in with the children's ward. So it's
Well, I've definitely worked with children in that situation, and it's there are a lot of problems.
Yes. I don't know. Somebody described it as being kind of an experimental ward. It felt like.
Wow.
But what I'd like to do, or what we would like to do, is begin by having you tell us your story. One thing you mentioned in the past was that Dr. Kelly Brogan's book, A Mind of Your Own, was really influential as you transitioned out of allopathy. And are you still in the allopathic field at all, or have you completely transitioned out of it? We'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, sure. No, I am completely out of it now. When my license was up for renewal in December of 2020, I let it expire. And the people that were still looking to hire me, I told them I was retired from allopathic medicine. So I've now stepped completely out of that paradigm, and I think that that's really necessary if you want to pursue truth and healing. Kelly Brogan's book was really influential because it really bridged two different worlds for me. I had already done a lot of debunking of the medical literature, and I had observed through my own practice that things were not effective. But what she did was introduce the natural healing paradigm. And I hadn't really been open to that before, but since she brought these two worlds together, because the first half of her book really criticized psychiatric medications by analyzing the research literature. And then in the second half, she presented a new way of addressing mental health using mostly nutrition and some detoxification. And when I opened myself up to actually trying this, you know, both on myself and working with a former colleague who was willing to give it a try, it turned out to be the first time I had seen a case of anxiety be cured in my career. So this really inspired and motivated me to go further. And then I spent about the next 3 years studying natural healing and learning as much as I can. And that kind of set me up to make this transition.
That's interesting.
Perfect.
Yeah. I first was introduced to the word allopathic medicine while reading Dr. Weil's book on health and healing back in the mid 80s, I guess, mid to late 80s. And I knew that he still practiced like sort of both naturopathic and, but it led me to following up and finding a homeopathic practitioner and, and Chinese medicine and, being open to those things, when I was a younger person and really not relying on we were in San Francisco. So the Kaiser Permanente system,
right.
Yes. And being very suspicious of that. Well,
for me, it really boils down to quite a simple decision. Once I learned that my prescription pad was essentially directing people to consume poison, how could I go on, prescribing poison for people? I had to extricate myself from the system. For the past, for the last 2 or 3 years that I was still in the system, really all that I was doing I was working with teenagers. Principally, I was taking them off all their psychiatric medications and trying to work with them through nutrition and through psychological means. Like, for example, I ran a meditation group. But it was, all based on voluntariness. So only the kids who really wanted to make progress and wanted to work on themselves, they were very, very successful. But everyone benefited from being off those poison medications.
I'm sure.
So that I couldn't stay in that system. I was just figuring a way out and biding my time and doing the best I could while I was still in it.
Yeah. And then, we've heard your story before, with your transition, especially into, the post-COVID world. Can you talk to our audience a little bit, briefly touch on that?
Well, sure. I mean, I had a lot of experience in clinical medicine, and I had a lot of experience in pharmaceutical and biotechnology research earlier in my career. And as you said, being an inventor, I actually had a medical device startup company for a while. So I really got exposure to a lot of things in the health system. And when the suspicion of a Chinese virus causing a pandemic was occurring, and then I was doing some traveling around the United States, and there were people wearing masks at the airport in California, I said, I've got to do some research and find out what's going on. And that really led me to the principal scientific papers where they said they discovered, this virus, because I said, well, I want to start at the beginning. And it was really a challenging experience to go through those papers, because as I was reading the experiments they were conducting, I was realizing that they actually couldn't prove the existence of a virus with the experiment they were doing. And I had to, of course, this is a bold statement for me to make as a psychiatrist, not as a, professional virologist or microbiologist, even though I had enough experience to understand exactly what they're doing in these experiments. So I had to really have some careful consideration and find some colleagues and other resources who have come to similar conclusions to help me, figure out what was the real truth. And I just decided to go public with it because it was too important not to get out there into the public domain. And it was a big risk for me because obviously it would affect my reputation as a medical doctor. Which it certainly did.
Yeah.
And it would create a lot of controversy and skepticism, even among people who also recognized that what the government was doing at the time in response to the pandemic, whether real or completely fabricated, as I believe, was still wrong. So it was a very controversial position. So when I initially released this, I actually asked a panel of alternative journalists to, witness it and to scrutinize me on the science to make sure that I was solid and there were no big holes. And over time, what people have seen is that anyone who's really looked at the same scientific research that I have has come to the same conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who are very resistant haven't really given themselves a chance to examine what people like myself or Tom Cowan and Sam Bailey are saying.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we've been seeing you talk to Dr. Cowan and also to the English couple that wrote.
Yes, Dawn Parker and David Lester.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're big fans of theirs.
Yeah.
Yes, they're awesome.
And so what the thing that I thought was interesting is you've been teaching, like us. I mean, I'd never even heard. So thanks to COVID,
yes,
I had never heard of something called terrain theory.
Right.
And I grew up.
I had never really heard of it either. So
was that part of your? I'm sorry.
No.
Was that part of your discovery then? Like, did you find your way into that thought process or that idea, that concept through your research, or how did that work?
The timing of this is really, some people would say that there are no coincidences, but it was in November and December of 2019 that I first was ready to actually, speak out publicly about natural healing and being critical of the allopathic health system. And I recorded, my first interview back then, talking about, pharmaceuticals and vaccines. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really know that this pandemic scenario was only a couple of months on the horizon. But interestingly, at that time, I had started to look into germ theory, not from the perspective of viruses. I hadn't gotten that far yet, but just looking at the early research of Louis Pasteur and his sort of rivals, Antoine Béchamp and Claude Bernard. And that's what first clued me into, this whole theory of pleomorphism and terrain theory, that it was actually a thing. And actually the scientific experiments that were done in the late 1800s and after the turn of the century actually were in support of terrain theory. And there was really no research showing that bacteria cause disease. There were some studies that were fraudulently manipulated by Pasteur and others, by the way, but there was no actual solid prima facie evidence. And so I had that perspective, but hadn't fully investigated it when I was called upon to, look at viruses, and found out that actually the science around viruses is even worse in quality.
Wow.
Yeah. I loved Dr. Cowan's idea that, viruses are basically what germs poop out, or what I forget what he said exactly.
Yeah. Well, what are cells? We're talking really not about, it's really problematic to talk about this because the word is so charged. Right. A virus, right? But what he's talking about is the particles that are shown in the electron microscope images are just cellular poop, basically, when, or pus from a wound in the cell. Really, that's even more accurate, because when our cells get damaged and die, they break up into little particles. And this has been known for quite a long time. And in fact, the virus hunters, after the electron microscope was invented, they said basically we can't find anything that we can't just say is a normal cellular breakdown product. And they were just about to give up when things changed, when Enders won a Nobel Prize and suddenly said that his experiments that were used to manufacture vaccines also somehow prove the existence of a virus, even though he didn't even say that in his papers when he published this procedure.
Right. Wow.
One of the moving right along, one of the things that we love about your site and some of the messaging that you've been really putting out there is that how important it is to detox. You recommend everything from fasting to cleansing, coffee cleanses, but you also bring in this idea of detoxing. Detoxing your sort of your psycho-spiritual self as well, that you need to do a lot of the shadow work. I'd like to kind of conflate this or combine this with this idea that there's a lot of free-floating anxiety going on in the sort of on social media and in the world in general. And also there's a lot of people like you who are transitioning into new roles, and they're facing incredible challenges. They're being attacked, and you know what that's about because we've read the hit pieces on you. So I
Don't
know
worry, there's more to come.
Yeah, and more I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
The same with us,
Well, we get just
So
completely shadow throttled.
yeah, we get shadow throttled. But so I know that's like 3 questions in one, but in the interest of time, I was wondering, would you talk about because really you're the only person that I've run across who talks about the purification or the detoxification prospect, but you implement the psychological and the spiritual aspect to that as well. So could you speak on that? And then could you speak about this sort of free-floating anxiety that we've heard about, and the anxiety that people in general are going through,
Yes.
whether they're on the side of thinking that this is a deadly pathogen and that they have to get their boosters and their vaccines. Those people are going through anxiety as well as those who aren't going that way. So maybe speak on that if you could. Sorry.
No, absolutely. And it's actually, I like the way that you bridge these two issues because they are intimately related. And I came to this whole stage only because of engaging in spiritual development work, in the past several years. As I was studying natural healing, I was also going through that. And, I want to just kind of explain what I mean when I say spiritual development work, because, I'm not talking about religious practice, like as prescribed by an official religious institution. But I'm also not talking about some kind of new agey or hedonistic practice. What I'm really talking about is working on yourself, trying to become a better person. And so that means some practical issues like being able to maintain your composure and equanimity in difficult situations, improving the way that you relate to other people. And of course, in order to achieve that, you have to do what I would refer to as shadow work, which is not my terminology. I believe Carl Jung originally talked about this, and other psychologists like Robert Augustus Masters, who has some excellent books with a process, talk about this. And it's getting to the kind of the dark side of yourself and confronting it. And you build up this dark side based on traumatic experiences that you have in your lifetime. And those don't have to be, an overt, obvious trauma like being raped or kidnapped. But they can be much, smaller things, but they still have a substantial impact on your psyche and your spirit. And if you can reintegrate those shadow aspects of the self back into your whole, then you will just function on a much higher level. Like you won't have trigger responses. You will handle yourself well in difficult situations. You will consider the consequences of your actions more carefully, and you'll become more and more developed the more and more you work on this. So this type of work is what really enabled me to have the courage to walk away from my career and make this transition, and the faith and optimism that things would work out well on my side. And as I was incorporating this into my philosophy of healing, I realized that there are 3 distinct aspects to the self: the body, the mind, and the spirit. And, these are all involved in any matter of health or illness, and they interact with each other in various ways. And when I was practicing conventional psychiatry, the theory there was that everything is the body. So that's why they would use drugs to influence the body.
Wow.
But that just doesn't pan out to our knowledge, because we all know that people experience, for example, a traumatic event but nothing physically happens to their body. But then they have a major, psychological problems after that. So, why would you consider that as just a materialist entity? And that's, the fundamental biological reductionist theory is rooted in materialism, saying that there is nothing else except the material substance, and all properties, arise from that, like our mental functioning. And of course, this cuts out any possibility of a creator, of spiritual forces, which have even been demonstrated scientifically. Actually, like, for example, if you look at the double slit experiment, the so-called observer effect, proves that materialism is incorrect. So this philosophy takes this into consideration. So of course, if you go through a detoxification, which is, another term for that could be purification, that of course you have to address it in all three realms as well. And so this is, something that I always emphasize. And when I work with individual clients, of course, it's very fascinating how many times there is a psycho-spiritual conflict that is the principal cause of a physical condition. Wow. And, it can be difficult to get to the bottom of that, but, you see this happening all the time. But even if you have something purely physical, like someone is injected with a poisonous vaccine and then their body is poisoned, there's still a major psycho-spiritual component, because if you view that as something that's going to cause you permanent disability, it's more likely to cause you permanent disability. If you view that as something that your body can recover from, then you're more likely to recover from it. So you need to explore these aspects and address them so that you have a comprehensive and approach which is most likely to be successful.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I really like, the last part of what you said. If you believe that it's going to cause you, a permanent disability or a permanent negative effect on your body, then it probably will. So I think what we're seeing a lot with you doctors who are stepping away from the allopathic realm is the solutions. So,
well, to speak to, just to add on to what you just said a moment ago, and what you said, Doctor, the other day I heard you talk about children and or somebody spoke where you were speaking, we're talking about children and receiving a shot, and their negative response to that, and the lack of desire to be there in that room at that moment,
right?
That had an effect on how that whatever it is, that substance going into their body.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so this is a really important and this has to do with some very interesting research involving the lymph system that goes into the brain. Before the early 2000s, even though we've had all these anatomy books and dissections, they did not know that the lymph vessels actually go into the brain. It was previously widely accepted that the brain had no lymph system. Now, I don't know how they can suddenly miss this and then suddenly find it in the early 2000s, but it has really significant consequences for this issue. So, and let me tell you that I first read about this in Forrest Moretti's book, Crooked, but there has been new research about what happens when aluminum is injected into the body. And when you get an injection of a vaccine, of virtually all vaccines prior to the COVID era contained aluminum. And aluminum is not something your body would encounter too much of in nature, so it doesn't really have a mechanism to process it and get rid of it. So it stores it, and it makes a granuloma at the site of the injection, which sometimes you can feel as a knot under the skin. Mm-hmm. And that is essentially like a jail cell for the aluminum, and these cells in your immune system that gobbled up the aluminum, like macrophages, are the guards. Now, when you have a situation where a child has to be forcibly restrained to receive an injection, where there are 3 people holding the child down and they're screaming and crying. Well, now you've gone from a simple, trauma from a needle in a calm person to a major traumatic event, because the body's mechanism kicks in as if they're being assaulted, right? It's an existential threat. So their survival mechanisms kick in. And one of those mechanisms is a general immune response. And when you have that general immune response, and by the way, this would happen with any significant injury, like a car accident, a broken bone, those kinds of things. The immune system responds to the central nervous system. So in other words, the immune cells go up into the lymphatics in the brain to make sure that there's nothing going on there, right? Because that's the critical organ. So in other words, instead of those immune cells taking the aluminum and sequestering it in that jail cell, now they gobble it up at the site, and then they bring it everywhere in the body to give a generalized trauma immune response, including bringing it up to the brain. And this increases the likelihood of causing, a central nervous system injury from the vaccine. And you can see the results of this by small lesions in the cranial nerves, because those lymphatic vessels go to an area of the brain in the brainstem where there are called the cranial nerve nuclei. And those are the nerves that supply the motor and sensory functions to the head and neck. So you can see things like very small deviations in the pupil. So one pupil is slightly more to one side or the other side. And you can notice that by looking at the amount of white on both sides of the eyes. And so the early discoverer of this, Dr. Andrew Molden, actually developed a program where he could input photographs, and it would take precise measurements of the facial symmetry, and it could detect small cranial nerve lesions that he could show before and after pictures of children who are vaccinated, and see the after pictures. You'd see evidence of these lesions, and they're more likely to occur if it's a traumatic injection like we described.
Wow. So many things that are going on that we are not seeing that have such a big effect on our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think what's amazing about you is that you've admitted to having vaccinated your kids in the past, right?
Yes, it's one of my most regrettable actions in my life, but I was ignorant and trusted the medical system like everyone else until I decided to look for myself. And when I did that, of course, I found out that I was really doing harm, and immediately changed my course of action.
That's really interesting. He has probably had, he was born in 1963. So he's probably had maybe 5 vaccines his whole life. Cycles, we eat out of a garden, pretty healthy for, someone in his age group. It's really interesting because nowadays people that are in their 30s and 40s have had some kind of physical problems their whole life, whether it's behavioral or, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune when I was 7 in 1977. And it's, I never fought getting shots. I would always be like, okay, whatever, stick my arm out,
Right.
you
were used to it. You became, a human guinea pig.
Pretty much, it felt like, Luckily, I had a mother who was really into, she wouldn't let me have sugar. And she did this by watching the way other children behaved in the hospital. So children who were given everything they wanted, lots of candy and sugar, because, they were very ill in wheelchairs. They were horrible kids. They were not, and I never got sugar, so she started there. And then we did some other things, a lot of water exercises and things like that really helped me get out of the wheelchair and walk. I was in a wheelchair for quite a few years, on prednisone for 7 years. So it definitely took its toll. So, but what I like about all of this, in the age of COVID, is that we're discovering that there are remedies for these really aggressive medications or vaccines or protocols that have really
interventions
that have really broken down the body. But I think that one of the things that I also wanted to talk to you about was I kind of want to go into your website, if you don't mind, and also the True Healing Conference that you have. And can you talk about what that is about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just how do people get involved? How would people meet with you if they wanted a private consultation, things like that?
Sure. Well, I mean, my website is definitely the portal to reach all of the things that I'm involved in. And if you join my newsletter, you'll be updated on all these things. But you can certainly request a consultation right on my website, andrewkaufmanmd.com. And I'm involved in several different, things. I have a True Medicine library, which is a repository of a large body of information on these topics, and that's growing all the time. And I also do live Q&A webinars, mostly about true healing, for members of the True Medicine library. But the True Healing Conference that we just had last weekend, which is our first annual virtual conference, and it was a joint effort with me and Tom Cowan. We wanted to do something different. A lot of interviews that we do are about the pandemic and about viruses, and it can be very, of course, negative and worrisome. But what we really want to do is we want to help usher in a new era of healing where people can actually achieve health and vitality by empowering themselves to take their own action and learning how to stay and how to get healthy and how to stay healthy. And in order to do this, we have to overcome many of the false misconceptions associated with not just medicine, but with biological science. Mm-hmm. And so what we did is we tried to assemble a group of pioneer researchers. And some of them are, normal academic professors, and some of them are independent researchers, and a variety of people. But all of these folks have really had major contributions to this field. And we tried to assemble the best people that we knew in this area to come together and begin a new curriculum, a new body of scientific knowledge about biology that can move us towards this, what we call true healing paradigm. And so we had, very mind-blowing 2 days. Many people were saying this, not just about one speaker, but about several different speakers, because we, we're challenging the paradigm like it's a disruptive presentation in that sense. And this is why people were really walking away with that kind of experience. Now, if you didn't know about it or get a chance to register, you actually still can sign up for our replay or for a digital download on the truehealingconference.com website. And also, several of the speakers are giving workshops this Saturday, and there's still time to register for those. I'll be giving one, actually, talking about how to use natural healing to address the seasonal flus and cold type illnesses. But many others, like Eileen McCusick, is going to talk about biofield tuning, how to tune yourself with tuning forks. Veda Austin is going to explain how to conduct these freezing experiments with water and make beautiful images. So we have, a number of these that would definitely be of interest. Sally Fallon is going to be giving one from the Weston A. Price Foundation, and the Bigelsen brothers also, about, their sort of terrain theory model of healing based on holographic blood, which was one of those mind-blowing presentations. So there's still a lot going on, and people can get access to.
Cool.
And I'm sure that some of our followers may recognize some of the names on that site. Yeah. Stefan Lanka, for one.
Yes, absolutely.
So they can access those additional conference content, as well as the upcoming things that you were talking about through that site?
Yeah, through that site, you can
Okay.
still sign up for a ticket to watch the replay. You can purchase a digital download. You can sign up for the workshops. And of course, anyone who buys any of those products gets a whole list of bonus material as well, which includes free access to my workshop that I was mentioned, as well as a Q&A webinar with Dr. Cowan. And those are just included along with Dr. Cowan's new ebook and a 2-month free to my True Medicine library. And you'll also get downloads of the workshops that you participate in.
I see. Okay.
So we're trying to offer as much value because, you know, one of the things is we realize that there's a lot of density in what we presented at this conference. And even I watching it just one time, I need to, you know, watch some of these talks several times and sit there and scrutinize the slides and, you know, really to get the most out of it. And all that, we're all providing all of that in these packages so people can take their time and study this because, you know, this is maybe kind of like the equivalent of, you know, a new biology textbook almost, but in a much more dynamic and exciting form.
And that's truehealingconference.com?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We have that in the show notes. So,
yeah. We'll definitely put it in the show notes. So I wanted to talk about, you know, this kind of goes along the lines with Medicamentum Authentica.
Yes.
So why that name? Like, why that, where did you come up with that name?
Well, so I've noticed that there is a lot of information coded in language, and language and words are very, very important to understand what's going on in the world. And in this sort of all the medical science related to the pandemic, what we see here is misuse and redefinition of words. Like everybody should be familiar with recently that the definition of vaccine was changed to include gene therapy as a vaccine, right? The word germ in and of itself means new growth, new life, right? We germinate seeds, right? The germ cells are the sperm and the egg. So when you then say a germ is an agent of disease, you're inverting the meaning.
Okay.
And so I wanted to make sure that the name of my effort was not something that could be changed. So I chose to make it in Latin, which is a dead language. And the definitions of a dead language will stay static forever. And Medicamentum Authentica, which I know is difficult to pronounce, but it means authentic medicine, or, you know, genuine medicine. And that's really what I'm about. I want to find, you know, the truth of how the body works, the truth about how to heal. And I want to, you know, impart that knowledge onto whoever is interested in taking that in. And that's where it comes from. And if you see the colorful symbol next to me on the screen,
I was just going to ask you about that.
Right. So that's actually the Medicamentum Authentica sigil.
Got it.
And if you scrutinize it really carefully, you'll see that all of the consonant letters from Medicamentum Authentica are actually in that symbol. And so a sigil is kind of a complex symbol that has an effect on the viewer. And we are actually programmed by these all the time. If you look at corporate logos, and you can find some very good lectures that tell you how to interpret the occult meanings of various of these corporate logos that they impart to occult symbolism. And, you know, so we're bombarded with these, and they're often used for dark purposes, like to get us to, you know, be loyal to their brand, to buy their product, to be under their spell. And I wanted to create a sigil that would counteract that would give you the message of self-empowerment, of seeking truth. And that's where that sigil is born from, and the effect that I hope it has on the viewers.
Yeah, that's great.
You know, as we both have marketing backgrounds
and design backgrounds,
and we're very, very familiar with the power of branding. So we always like it, whether it's done for a spiritual purpose or whatever. Anything that you know, another brand that comes up that's actually for good, we're always, you know, happy to see that. There's not a lot of people that understand the power of branding. It's you can't say the word, like McDonald's without seeing the golden arches, so.
Well, and that's also an unfortunate thing. I mean, in our,
Yeah.
that's a sign of living in, the type of world that we live in,
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, corporate culture that has invaded our lives.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, there's a lot of those corporate practices that, I mean, I am, trying to run somewhat of a business because
Good.
doing all of this work costs money, right? I mean, we can't
Right.
put out a conference. We had like 10 people working for months, right, to make this conference happen. And I can't just get all those people to volunteer months of their time. So it requires, money to keep going and providing these services. But I want to say that, we don't adopt practices that are typical. Like I will never price anything 99, right? Because that's deceptive. It makes it seem cheaper than it really is because of that one penny. So, simple things like that, are really important to the ethics of what we do, that we want to make sure that whatever people pay us, their hard-earned money for, that they get the appropriate value. And that it's meaningful for them in their life in some way. And if that's not the case, then please, we'll be happy to give the money back, and we'll find another way, so that we make sure that we provide something that has real value.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
How many of the speakers do you know? I don't know if you know offhand, but like the speakers that you had in your series or your conference, how many of them are out there doing their own sort of podcasting or video casting or whatever it is you want to call it?
Yeah. I'd say about half of them are doing that. Some of them are just doctors and researchers, and they go on the lecture circuit, but they don't have a newsletter list or a podcast. And then some of them are extremely well versed. I mean, obviously we had David Icke there. We've all seen his material, and people like Kelly Brogan has put out a lot of material as well. And some, many of these people Tom and I have interviewed on our podcasts also. So they do interviews, but no, they don't all have their own platforms. And that's another reason why it's important for us to be out there, because, someone like John Stewart Reed or Dolph Zantinga, like these guys have amazing research on water and sound and cymatics, but, they really go to academic conferences, and they're in a certain kind of world that is not always accessible to your average person who's interested in this. And we really wanted to bridge those two worlds and have them give their material, not as if they're speaking to other scientists, but we carefully instructed them not to dumb down the material. Like we want people to know the real science, how the experiments are done, how they came to their conclusions, but just in a language that's understandable, not in, scientific jargon. And they were really awesome about doing that. So, of course, those people don't have the kind of, platforms and that's why we can use ours to sort of bring their information out. And the response was great. I mean, John Stewart Reed, everybody was like, is he doing a workshop? We need more time with him. Right? So now we're trying to arrange something, post hoc, because, we just missed, we didn't think of it, or he didn't think it would be a good idea at the time. But that's how, people are reacting to being exposed to this amazing information.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it's amazing, this medium that we're currently, using is both, wonderful in how it can disseminate really great information. And it's also, detrimental. We found it to be, really useful for us to augment the work that we do in our essays, our video essays, and mini films documentaries that we do. But so we've felt that it was necessary to move into this sphere. But we've also seen a lot of spinning out, a lot of psychologically, what would you call it? You want to weigh into that?
Well, it's pretty toxic. I always say that social media was the best invention and then the worst invention. It's brought out a lot of personalities that I don't think otherwise would have found a space to be so toxic without it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mentioned this in the notes that I sent you before. How do you, obviously your work is online. So how do you stay away from the toxic element of the online experience?
Well, so I think it's becoming more and more clear that these social media platforms that we have become dependent upon were really designed to, one, gather data on us, on our behavior, on our, even facial recognition, right? Like you saw that happen in Facebook, that they developed this based on using you as data to develop this facial recognition software.
Yep.
So it's for that purpose of researching, and it's for the purpose of manipulating behavior. And you can see now that they are exerting control over the subject matter. And you can see also this dynamic of how people are affected by this, right? And we've even seen, children engage in suicidal behavior because of conflicts on social media, and et cetera. So once, of course, I recognized this a while ago and decided to limit my use. And really what is, in my opinion, the best way to approach this at present, and it may not be possible in the future, we may need to even walk away from, many of these platforms and, only use the dark web. I'm not sure how it's going to go. But for now, if you take control of how you utilize these platforms, right, that you say, okay, this is how what I'm going to use them for. And for me, it's really about communication. So I communicate with various people directly, right, through these platforms. So like, Facebook Messenger or Telegram or Signal, and communication between people is important, right? And their private communication channels, they don't really censor, right? So I never get involved in debates or posts unless I'm doing it for a particular purpose. Like I wanted to be able to talk about this issue of pathogenic priming, for example, or antibody dependent enhancement, because my view of all the scientific papers on that is that it's a made up thing, that it doesn't really exist. But you have all these doctors saying that there was these studies where the ferrets died or all the animals died, right? And all the studies I could find, none of the animals died. They were all sacrificed and then autopsied. So, but they weren't actually sick.
Okay.
So I put out a post on Facebook and I said, can anyone, show me the study where all the animals died? And I got a million responses. I mean, it was very popular post, but I was using this for a purpose because I wanted to see, is this study actually out there? And for some reason, I couldn't find it in my own research. So I'm like kind of checking myself, and people were really enthusiastic about it. And of course, not one of them could actually find a study where the animals died. Many of them just quoted other doctors saying, oh, he said there's this study or that study. And then you look at that study and no animals got sick or died.
Wow.
So then I was able to, with much more confidence, speak about that issue and say, no, this is not a real issue. So that is kind of an effective way that you can use that. Unfortunately, it wasn't, censored, but I never get into debates or arguments. I've done that. I see that it's not productive. There are trolls. People are not open-minded. It's not a real discussion.
Okay.
So it's like, if you get involved in that drama, you're going to be consumed by it. It's going to manipulate you. And that's where the vulnerability is. So I would say, once a month, I put a post on there, and usually it's just to announce something. Okay. I exchange messages with people independently. There are some groups that I might follow to just learn about upcoming events, but I don't I don't use it in, any other way like that. And I'm very, very careful about my interaction with it, to avoid getting sucked in or being manipulated. And I also realized that I could lose my account at any time.
Right.
Because I'm a very controversial figure. Yeah. And, I know that they're going to take me off YouTube pretty soon, I think, because even though I haven't posted anything there in over 6 months, or anything controversial, only a couple of like short things directing you to look at my interview on another platform where it's not censored. But they started just taking down my old material, censoring it now after it's been up there 8 months, 10 months, a year.
That happens to us.
Gave me a strike and then a second strike. So I'm sure they're going to take down the channel. Soon.
And we're 2 strikes in ourselves.
Yeah. And also, we have to move away from these Google-based platforms, right? Yeah. I mean, it's one, incestuous family, right? Facebook owns Instagram, right? Google owns YouTube. Right. And then there's Twitter. I'm not even sure, they may be owned by one of the other companies, but, we have to get off those platforms and, like go on things like Odyssey and Rockfin, and, brand new Tube or Gab or, Telegram, Signal, any place that will, that is demonstrating that they're completely censorship free. And then if they start censoring, we need to leave there as well.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of Rockfin, hello to our Rockfin viewers out there.
Hello, Rockfin.
We're streaming live to Rockfin right now, in fact.
But okay, so this is more than just ignore trolls. This is really just kind of
feedback, weird feedback.
Oh, we are getting some feedback, aren't we?
Oh. Uh-oh. I guess YouTube is listening.
So this is more than just ignoring trolls. Did you mute Dr. Kaufman?
No.
Well, I did. I wanted to make sure I wasn't causing the feedback.
Oh, okay. Right. Sorry. Yeah. So this is more than just ignoring trolls. This is literally just, kind of a lifestyle change. And then obviously we've all heard, all of the doctors say, turn off your Wi-Fi at night, sleep with your phones in another room. I'm hearing a lot of people.
I would say even turn off your Wi-Fi all the time. I have a wire, an Ethernet cable, it gives you a better bandwidth, and then I've set up that I can stream, any of the videos on, BitChute or Odyssey or whatever through my television by connecting the computer with a cord, right, to the television. So you can really do all the reasonable things without any Wi-Fi, and then, take your cell phone and, put it on the charger in a corner of the house somewhere and leave it there, right? In airplane mode, or at least with the Wi-Fi turned off and the Bluetooth turned off. And, then you can much better limit your interaction, right? Because you have to kind of sit down at the computer rather than just, take your phone out of your pocket or your purse or whatever. And then you will, not get the Wi-Fi. And, it's a little tricky, by the way, to turn off the Wi-Fi on the router. So you might have to, Google it. You have to do it. Well, but don't give up. You can figure it out.
In San Francisco, we had a very easy DSL company, and I was able to do Ethernet if I needed to. But now, here in Pennsylvania, they've forced you into one of 3 large carriers, and I don't even know if there is an Ethernet port in our modem to
Well, it should be on the Wi-Fi router. It should have several ports. I need to look. You can always buy a different router if you need to. That has that functionality. But all the ones I've seen do. Have outputs, but it's weird. They don't have a button on the box that's, Wi-Fi on, off, right? You have to go, through the internet to turn it off, actually use the Wi-Fi to control, to turn the Wi-Fi off.
Interesting.
So, I guess with this, speaking philosophically or on a more broad spectrum of this is lifestyle changes are necessary in order to maintain good health. I'm seeing posts from friends on social media that are saying their hair is falling out and it's never happened before. And I think it's because more people are on social media and around their phones and all these toxic devices more than they've ever been in the past, because because of the pandemic and social distancing laws and mandates, but you know what I'm saying? These kind of
yeah. Well, there's a
practices.
twofold, issue here, because there's sort of the direct effect of the wireless signal, right? Which definitely has an effect on the body. And, if you pay attention, you can even feel this. Like when I use the touch screen on my phone, for example, I can feel this kind of like dull, tingling ache in my fingertip.
Wow.
From it, right? Because it's directly getting this, signal from the device.
Wow.
And, or if I used to carry it in my right front pocket for several years before I was aware of this. And my right hip was actually much less flexible than my left hip. And once I took it out of my pocket, over time, it went back to normal.
Wow.
So there really are those physical effects. And of course, we've seen, that they can cause tumors like acoustic neuromas when you hold it to your ear for a long time, and lots of other effects. But there's also the psychological effect, right? That, that there's so much hypnotic programming, and this kind of relates to what you were talking about with mass formation earlier, that is around generating fear. Right. I mean, anytime you mention anything health related in a post on Facebook, for example, this warning comes up, right? Like a government warning, like, oh my God, it's an emergency, make sure you practice safe COVID. Right. And so you're getting like that fear hit every time.
Right.
And that also has a deleterious effect on the health. When you're in a state of fear or a survival state, that your body does not function in optimal way because it's geared towards the immediate survival threat. It's not taking care of the long-term planning. Normally your body's about, okay, how do we keep ourselves healthy? We deal with what's coming, fall's coming. It's time for the seasonal, change in physiology or the house cleaning or whatever your body would normally do depending on the normal natural cycles. But when you're in a state of fear and survival, then everything changes to only support that. So your cortisol system kicks in, for example, right? You have different metabolites. You're metabolizing energy a different way, right? And there's going to be more generation of oxygen-free radicals, for example. So your body's going to do less, normal cleansing procedures and autophagy and that kind of stuff, that because your sleep will be different. And, there's a lot of consequences from that as well. So you can completely, liberate yourself from these things by taking a few, steps like that. But still, I'm not saying that you should divorce yourself from the virtual world, but just to do it in a healthier, more sort of purposeful way, rather than just being tethered, to that device all the time, that you're always having to deal with it and check it and stuff like that. I mean, remember when you only had a landline phone that was attached to the wall, right? And it's like, if you weren't within 10 feet of that device, right, you couldn't have any communication except to the people actually physically in your presence.
That is
and there were some inconveniences with that system, of course, but we still survived and thrived and did just fine. So you can take a little bit of a step back towards that and not really suffer as a result.
I don't know. I'm ready for the tin can and string.
I know.
To tell you now.
I want to go way back. Speaking of going way back, I would like to read a piece that you wrote in the American Journal of Psychiatry. I believe 2000.
Yeah, you're going way back here.
Yeah. So if you really quickly want to bring up the website, it's psychiatryonline.org. It's right here.
Okay.
Sorry, we don't have the website in front of us. So just go to psychiatry. So let me read this. Then we'll speak very briefly, and then it's nearly time to end. So you wrote in the American Journal of Psychiatry, should we use law enforcement for emergency transportation of people with mental illness? Do The anachronistic practice of treating people with mental illness as criminals has been criticized since the early 20th century. Historian Albert Deutsch wrote in 1937, the disgraceful legal attitude toward the mentally ill, which has contributed in no small degree to the stigma attached to mental disease, is evidenced in the terminology still widely used in commitment procedures. The mentally ill person is referred to as a suspect. He stands trial in the position of quasi-criminal. In the late 1930s, an estimated 64% of patients, sorry,
There you go. Yeah.
64% of patients were transported to state hospitals by police, and 29% were detained in jails along the way. And in recent data from an unpublished study from the MacArthur Research Network on mandated community treatment, the lifetime prevalence of patients who were transported by police to psychiatric treatment was 38% to 52%. So I don't know. We come from a position of class war. We also did a video essay where we talk about how a lot of the practices that we are experiencing through the age of COVID are similar practices that criminals are experiencing. For instance, just to give an example, when you're in jail, you need to retrieve your goods through a glass, like a glass shield, and that's what they're doing in the age of COVID now. When you go to the store, and you purchase something from the store, it's through a glass shield or a plastic shield. So, and then compounded with that is this idea that we're also mentally ill for not just sticking our arm out and getting a medical intervention. So in the last few minutes that we have with you, would you mind talking a little bit about that? Were you able to bring up his?
I wasn't able to get it. It wasn't coming up.
Okay.
It was difficult.
So yeah, I pulled up the website.
Well,
so
okay.
Maybe I can grab it.
Okay.
So anyway, would you mind speaking to that?
Sure. And I think I have a PDF of that article I could always provide you later if you can't find it. But this was one of the first pieces I had published, actually, an editorial. And what was occurring for me is that I was, working at Duke as a psychiatry resident. And I saw that when I was at the state hospital, John Umstead Hospital, almost everyone was arriving there in police, and they were, basically distraught and demoralized as a result of this. Like, they would be taken out of the vehicle and walk into a hospital where they're coming for treatment, and they were in cuffs and shackles.
Wow.
Right. And these people weren't violent. Like, here's a typical scenario, because some of these people were severely mentally ill and maybe hard to communicate with, but many of them, it would be like this situation. They lived in a rural area in North Carolina. They were an alcoholic. And, one evening they decided, I'm tired of this. I want to get clean. I need help. And so they go to their local hospital and say, hey, can you help me, get clean from drinking? And they would say, okay, no problem. Have you ever thought about suicide? And they'll be like, no. And then they'll be like, well, if you were to think about it, how would you kill yourself? And they would, then the person would eventually say something, and then they would put on the paperwork that the person came in with a plan to kill themselves. And that would justify police transportation and civil commitment. But this was a person who came voluntarily asking for treatment.
Right.
And to reward them for that, right, they're being basically deprived of their freedom by being put under civil commitment, and which they can challenge, but they're going to be held at least for a couple of days until they can get before a magistrate, even to challenge it. Right. And then they're going to be treated like by, being taken to jail or being cuffed and shackled when all they did was ask for help. Right. And this is the health system. We're supposed to provide help, not punishment.
Right.
And this was it was not only a human rights violation, but it was a barrier to me. How could I establish trust and rapport with someone to help them when, the way they got to me was by being thrown in the back of a car, and restrained and treated, with disdain. So I tried to talk with my supervisors and with the hospital administration about this practice, and they could care less about the people that we were providing services for. And then I learned that the main reason for this was that, one, police transportation is less expensive than an ambulance, and two, it's more politically favorable to increase the police budget than to increase the mental health budget. So that's why the system was, relying on law enforcement officers to carry this out. And all of the sheriff's department in the counties actually received state funds or a budget for this transportation.
Okay.
Right. So there was actually lucrative to them. And then the officers, of course, they just didn't have any training or knowledge about what they're dealing with. They're just used to taking criminals to jail. So they just basically, this is just another criminal, but we're taking them to a different jail.
Right.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So that's, so of course we are doing now the same kind of things. Like a lockdown is what you do in a prison to prevent a riot.
Exactly.
Right. It's not quarantine, which is sequestering people who are sick with a contagious disease. So you're absolutely right. And then like in stores where they have the tape on the floor that says, you're supposed to stay away from the next person.
Right.
That is also a procedure right out of prisons. And the reason is to prevent them from passing contraband between each other.
Oh.
Right.
That totally makes sense.
Yes. And also to prevent them from talking to each other. They can't whisper to each other and make, plans to, conspire against the guards or anything like that. And we're, the purpose is the same now. It is to keep them from exchanging thoughts and ideas and smiles and human interaction, so that they won't all figure out that, that everyone is against them taking away their freedom. They'll just continue to only get messages from the news and social media to be scared of a dangerous, and deadly imaginary virus.
Right.
Right.
Wow. That is okay. I feel very vindicated because, I've been saying this practically from day one.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is how, prisons run. The model for this entire thing is based on, the success of the prison industry. Can we please understand that that's what's going on? So it's really nice to hear you talk about it as well.
And follow that up. Yeah.
Right. And I, by the way, just, you mentioned that my forensic psychiatry, but I've actually provided clinical services in several jails and prisons. So I've actually seen these procedures play out in reality. It's not just from, watching, Orange is the New Black. Right. I was just going to go there. You are a forensic psychiatrist, so you would know firsthand. Well, it has been fast.
I know, very fast.
It's been incredible. Thank you so much for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
We, once again, can you please tell our audience how they can reach you?
Yeah, well, please, the best thing is to go to andrewkaufmanmd.com and sign up for my newsletter, and you'll get free access to my recent presentation on ivermectin, which is a very controversial topic these days. So if you want to hear what I have to say about it, just click that link. You'll get access to the video, and then you'll be able to get our newsletters and keep up with what's going on. And I want to just say, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of this interview and how we, covered really this material from a different perspective. And I would love to come back and, do a part 2 if that's something that
we would love that.
Yes,
we would absolutely love that.
Thank you so much.
That's something that we try to do on this particular program, is to talk to people about things that are affecting us in our daily lives that are a little different than what everybody else is talking about. So coming at it from a different angle is definitely what we're trying to achieve here. So thank you for bringing that, or mentioning that.
We will certainly we're scheduling for our next round of next season of Pullquotes now. So we'll get our schedules coordinated.
All right, fantastic.
Great.
Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, Dr. Kaufman, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank
All right,
you.
I look forward to it, and thank you very much, and farewell to everyone.
All right, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Wow, that's fantastic.
That was incredible. Yeah. So informative. I didn't get to touch on every topic.
You had a lot to cover.
I did. Yeah.
I was looking at your
6 pages of notes.
Yeah, your 6 pages of notes, and
Yeah.
you know, and I was like, God, I wish they were bullet points, because then I could have like, but
Right.
that's okay, because you know, we this is our first season. This is basically, we're getting to the end of our first season of Pullquote. We have one more show, and that is with
Kevin Jenkins,
yes,
one of the Disinformation Dozen.
Right. And we pre-recorded that program, and that'll be on next week.
Yeah,
so
and
you can watch
be
that.
Prepared, because he really does pack a wallop.
Yeah, he does.
So,
he doesn't hold back.
He's very fiery, so it's nice to have that kind of balance. You know.
Yeah.
One of the people who reached out to us regarding Dr. Andrew Kaufman was, he's very professional, and this is true, you know, and we appreciate that coming from professional backgrounds. We, you know, we like to cut loose every once in a while.
Well, we're also artists, and so, you know,
we're also creative.
Yeah.
But we should probably let everybody go.
Okay.
And we will see you again with Kevin Jenkins in about a week.
All right. Great.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
guys. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Bye-bye. Book of Hours are artists here to empower and embolden your response to the constant negative sound bites that attack your news and social media feeds. In order to continue making the video essays and art you've come to enjoy, we need your support. Make a one-time donation or become a patron. Thank you.